So think about this for a second. A year from now, your colleagues probably aren't going to remember a single number from that spreadsheet you presented this morning.
Oh, absolutely not. Not one number.
Right, not one. But they will completely remember the story you told them about, that one specific customer's catastrophic failure.
Yeah, and how your team pulled them out of the fire at the last minute.
Exactly. And so today, we're going deep into this source material about mastering the narrative. And we're really tearing down this myth of the perfectly rational data processor.
Because we kind of operate in this bizarre corporate landscape, right? Where there's this unwritten rule that professionalism has to equal like robotic mechanical efficiency.
Totally. It's like you load up these massive shipping containers of raw data and facts and quarterly figures, and you just send them across the ocean of the boardroom table.
Hoping for the best.
Yeah, hoping for the best, expecting them to just be unloaded perfectly into your colleagues' brains on the other side.
Yeah.
But we all know deep down that half that cargo just falls straight into the ocean.
Oh, more than half. I mean, you look around the room or you stare at the gallery of glazed over eyes on a Zoom call, and you can visibly see the disconnect happening in real time.
You really can. It's painful.
It's the absolute definition of being information rich and meaning poor. The assumption that there's this frictionless transfer of data is probably the greatest fallacy in modern business communication.
Because we treat human beings like they're computers.
Right.
Like they have limitless RAM and a perfectly objective processing unit.
Right. When the reality is our cognitive architecture is, well, it's aggressively filtered. The brain is constantly looking for reasons to discard information just to save energy.
So when you just drop off those shipping containers of data, you're basically asking the audience's prefrontal cortex to do all the heavy lifting.
Exactly. You're making them do the sorting, the categorizing, finding the relevance. And most people simply won't expend that caloric energy.
They just won't do it.
No, they'll nod, they'll pretend to absorb it, and then they'll forget it the literal second they walk out the door.
Which is wild. So if you're listening to this right now, I'm willing to bet you are sitting on a mountain of data yourself.
Oh, without a doubt.
You probably have a calendar packed with presentations, endless professional conversations, status updates, postmortems, all of it.
It never ends.
It really doesn't. So our mission today is to completely transform how you communicate that information. We want to move you from just, participating in a baseline transaction of facts
to actively shaping the narrative, and by extension, actually shaping the decisions of the people around you.
Yes. We are breaking down the literal neurochemistry of persuasion based on these really fascinating communication strategies.
We're going to explore why data dumps fail on a biological level, which is super interesting.
It really is. And we'll walk through a highly specific 4-part narrative framework that you can scale to absolutely everything. I mean, from a 2-minute project update to a high-stakes job interview or even a massive enterprise sales pitch.
Because we really need to dispel the notion that storytelling is just some sort of soft skill,
Right, like it's just a stylistic preference for keynote speakers and marketers.
Exactly. It's not. It's a fundamental leadership competency. Relying purely on logic and statistics to move people isn't just ineffective, it is actively fighting an uphill battle against human biology.
So by the end of our time today, you're going to have this really practical, repeatable toolkit to make sure you never deliver one of those forgettable, dry, glaze-inducing updates ever again.
Let's hope so.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's ground this in a scenario that I think everyone listening knows intimately. The conference dynamic.
Oh yeah, the classic back-to-back speakers.
So you have 2 speakers back-to-back. Speaker A takes the stage and just delivers a masterclass in comprehensive data visualization.
We've all seen this guy.
Oh, totally. They have the line graphs, the scatter plots, predictive models, the works. The logic is airtight.
It's a literal mountain of evidence proving their thesis.
Exactly. But then, 12 months later, the audience cannot recall a single overarching theme of that presentation, let alone a specific data point.
It just completely evaporates.
Right. But then Speaker B steps up.
Yeah.
And Speaker B starts with a singular point of failure, like a specific client facing a massive supply chain bottleneck.
And they walk the audience through the initial panic, the failed attempts to patch the problem.
Yeah, the late night realization and then the eventual architectural overhaul that actually save the account.
But the critical element here, and I think this is what people miss, is that Speaker B didn't abandon the data.
No, not at all.
The statistics, the efficiency gains, the predictive models, they were all still in the presentation.
But they were woven into the chronology of the problem-solving journey.
Exactly. And a year later, the audience can recite that core message flawlessly.
So why is that? I mean, if our brains are literally hardwired for stories, why is the professional world so obsessed with the data dump? Have we just been trained to think stories are unprofessional?
Well, the divergence in retention between those two speakers, it really isn't about charisma. It's entirely about how they interfaced with the audience's neurology.
Okay, break that down for me.
We often look at narrative as just a vehicle for entertainment, right? But from an evolutionary psychology standpoint, it is a survival mechanism.
A survival mechanism, like literally keeping us alive.
Literally. Long before we had the written word, let alone, double entry bookkeeping, the human brain evolved to pass down critical knowledge, culture, and warnings through chronological causality.
Right, because our cognitive architecture prioritizes information that follows a specific sequence of cause and effect.
Exactly. Especially when it involves agents or characters that we can identify with.
So if someone just lifted statistical probabilities of danger, like 20% of interactions with this specific plant result in toxicity.
Right. The cognitive load required to internalize that abstract probability is immense. It's just too much work for the brain.
But framing it chronologically like a member of the tribe ate the plant, got super sick, and barely survived, that bypasses all the analytical friction.
Exactly. The brain locks onto it because, historically, narrative was our primary defense mechanism against a really hostile environment.
And that brings up this massive structural problem in how we communicate at work, doesn't it?
Oh, a huge problem. We've built these corporate environments that idolize the abstract probability and actively shun the chronological narrative.
We label the data as hard skills or facts, and the narrative as soft.
But if you look at the neurochemistry, it's the narrative that actually creates a physical change in the listener.
Right. The source material talks about how introducing a character facing a conflict triggers the synthesis of oxytocin.
Yes. But it's not just about feeling a vague sense of warmth or connection, is it? It's about what oxytocin functionally does to the brain's defense mechanisms.
Oh, that is so interesting. What does it do?
Well, the release of oxytocin in response to narrative tension fundamentally alters how receptive the listener is.
Okay.
In a standard data dump scenario, your audience's brain is usually in a low-level state of critical evaluation, and that state is modulated by cortisol.
So they're stressed.
Basically, yes. They are looking for holes in your argument. They are questioning your methodology. They are actively defending their existing worldview against whatever new data you're throwing at them.
Wow. So they're almost fighting you mentally.
Exactly. But when you introduce a narrative with a relatable entity facing a genuine conflict, the resulting oxytocin synthesis actively suppresses that cortisol response.
It actually lowers the barrier of skepticism.
It does. It fosters empathy and in-group identification with both the speaker and the subject of the story.
So you aren't just bypassing their critical filter, you are literally recruiting their neural circuitry to experience the problem right alongside you.
Precisely. They aren't passively receiving your conclusion anymore. They are actively synthesizing it with you.
It's like downloading a massive software update.
Oh, I like where you're going with this.
Like the raw data, the spreadsheets, the market analysis, that's just the raw code. But the story architecture, that is the installer package. If you just dump gigabytes of raw code onto someone's desktop, the operating system has no idea what to do with it.
It just sits there.
Yeah, it sits there taking up space until it's eventually just deleted.
But the narrative framework actually unzips the file.
Yes. It unzips the file, requests the admin permissions via that oxytocin release we talked about, and actually integrates the code into the listener's operating system.
That is an incredibly accurate way to model it. And when you realize that narrative is the installer package, the sheer scale of wasted capital in the corporate world just becomes staggering.
Oh, I can't even imagine.
Think about the millions of hours spent building slide decks that are essentially just raw code.
Right, or the strategic pivots that completely fail to gain traction internally because leadership just slid a spreadsheet across the table.
And they expect the entire organization to instantly align. It's madness.
Because without the architecture of cause, effect, challenge, and resolution, the data is entirely unanchored.
It requires the listener to build their own installer package on the fly. And honestly, most people simply do not have the cognitive bandwidth to do that in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon strategy meeting.
Nobody does. I mean, I certainly don't.
Exactly.
Okay, so we understand the biological imperative now. We know the raw code needs the installer package. So let's get into the engineering of it.
Let's do it.
Let's look at the architectural blueprints of a professional story. According to the breakdown, we are talking about 4 distinct pillars.
Character, conflict, journey, and resolution.
Right. And I really want to stress test these because the instinct for a lot of professionals is to hear the word story and immediately think they need to write like a Hollywood screenplay.
Yeah, they think they need to be Aaron Sorkin suddenly.
Exactly. So let's ground this in a very standard, boring, quarterly marketing update.
Okay, hit me.
The default, purely transactional update sounds something like this. Our Q3 campaign was highly successful, resulting in a 20% increase in user engagement.
Which, I mean, that is a positive outcome, but as an informational payload, it's completely inert.
It's dead on arrival.
It gives the audience no context for the effort it took, no understanding of the strategic landscape, and really no reason to care about the 20%.
Other than a fleeting acknowledgement that, hey, a metric went up.
Right. It is a statement of state, not a narrative of change.
Okay, so let's run that exact same 20% metric through the 4 pillars.
Let's see how it changes.
So pillar 1 is the character. If we frame it as at the beginning of Q3, our core marketing team felt completely stalled, losing traction in an increasingly noisy, saturated market.
Notice how we aren't talking about a single protagonist here. We are anthropomorphizing the entire department.
And that is a crucial distinction, right?
Yeah.
The character in a professional narrative does not need to be an individual person.
Not at all. It can be a team, a brand, a specific user demographic, or even the whole company.
As long as they have agency.
Exactly. The only structural requirement for the character pillar is that the entity possesses agency and is capable of being acted upon by external forces.
So by stating that the team felt stalled and lost, you are immediately providing an anchor for empathy.
Yes, you are establishing a baseline state that the audience can relate to, because let's be honest, everyone has experienced professional stagnation at some point.
Which bleeds directly into pillar 2, the conflict.
The noisy, saturated market, the feeling of losing traction.
And I would argue this is the single most violated principle in all of corporate communication.
Oh, without a doubt. We have this deep-seated fear of admitting that things aren't perfect.
But without the conflict, there is zero forward momentum. There is no story.
Conflict is the absolute engine of attention. If you begin a presentation by signaling that everything is operating optimally, you're basically giving the audience's brain permission to power down.
Because there's no threat.
Right. You are signaling that there is no threat to mitigate and no gap to close. And the human brain is fundamentally a gap-closing machine.
So when you introduce a conflict, like a loss of traction, a threat from a competitor, or a systemic inefficiency, you create cognitive dissonance.
Yes. The audience subconsciously asks, well, how are we going to resolve this state of imbalance?
You've essentially manufactured a reason for them to care.
Exactly. The conflict is what elevates the data from just random trivia to vital intelligence.
It's the difference between telling someone how a fire extinguisher works when they are just sitting in a calm room versus explaining it to them while the wastebasket is actively in flames.
That's a great way to put it. The conflict provides the actual utility for the information.
Okay, so we have the stalled team, which is our character, facing the noisy market, which is our conflict.
Right. So pillar 3 is the journey.
This is where we say, instead of doubling down on our standard ad spend, we pivoted. We interviewed our most frustrated users, mapped their pain points, and took a calculated risk on a highly unpolished, authentic user story campaign.
Now, the journey pillar is where you demonstrate the friction of problem solving. This is where you actually validate your strategic thinking.
Because it can't just be easy.
No, it cannot simply be a seamless, instant transition from problem to solution, because that completely lacks credibility.
People don't believe it.
They don't. The journey must illustrate effort, adaptation, and ideally a departure from the status quo.
So notice the phrasing we used. Took a calculated risk. Interviewed frustrated users.
Yes. It shows active engagement with the conflict. You are outlining the specific methodology your team used to bridge the gap created by the conflict.
And finally, pillar 4, the resolution. Here is where the payload is finally delivered.
The big reveal.
Right. As a result of that pivot, not only did we see engagement jump by that 20%, but more importantly, we fundamentally shifted how our users view the brand. We transitioned from a vendor to a community.
And this is where we separate a mere result from a true resolution.
Because the 20% increase is just a result. It's just a metric.
Exactly. But a resolution must answer the existential question of the whole narrative. So what?
Why does this matter?
Right. What is the new baseline? How has the fundamental state of the character or the environment actually changed?
So by tying the 20% increase to the transformation from vendor to community, you are providing a strategic takeaway that the audience can internalize.
Yes, and apply to their own work. You have given the raw data a philosophical wrapper.
What really strikes me when we lay it out like this is the efficiency of it. I mean, the story way takes maybe 30 seconds longer to articulate than the boring way.
30 seconds, tops.
But the return on investment in terms of audience retention and strategic alignment is just exponential.
It is. You are delivering the exact same cargo, the 20% increase, but the vehicle you used to deliver it ensures it actually arrives intact in their brains.
And it scales perfectly, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You can condense those 4 pillars into a single paragraph for a quick email update, or you can expand them into a full 60-minute keynote.
The architecture remains identical. Character, conflict, journey, resolution.
And honestly, once you internalize that structure, you start seeing the absence of it everywhere.
Particularly in high-stakes environments, right?
Right.
Where people just let their anxiety completely override their communication strategy.
Yes, and there is no higher stakes environment than the job interview.
Oh man, the job interview. It is the ultimate crucible for narrative control, isn't it?
It really is, because the product you are attempting to differentiate and sell is yourself. The stakes are intensely, deeply personal.
And the prompts they give you are almost always disguised invitations for narrative.
Always. Tell me about a time you led a complex project. Or tell me about a time you overcame a systemic failure.
They are literally begging for a story.
Yet the default response for the vast majority of candidates is to revert to just resume recitation.
They strip away the narrative completely out of this misguided desire to sound like optimally efficient.
Yes, they just provide a sterilized list of duties and outcomes.
Okay, let's dissect this, because the contrast here is brutal. The typical response to, tell me about a time you faced a challenge, goes something like this.
Go for it.
In my previous role, I conducted a comprehensive analysis of our departmental workflow, identified key redundancies, deployed a new automation software, and subsequently reduced our processing time by 10%.
Wow. It is perfectly accurate, completely sterile, and entirely unmemorable.
I fell asleep halfway through my own sentence.
Consider the cognitive state of the interviewer, though. They are likely interviewing 6, maybe 8 candidates in a single day.
They are experiencing severe decision fatigue.
Exactly. So if every candidate provides a variation of that factual robotic sequence, they all just blur into this monochromatic block of generic competence.
You've proven that you can execute a task, sure, but you've provided zero insight into your operational psychology.
You haven't shown them how you navigate friction. You haven't shown them who you are when the servers crash at 2 a.m.
So we need to apply the 4 pillars to create what the source calls the empathetic protagonist response.
Let's hear it.
Okay. When I took over the department, my team was completely underwater with administrative backlog. We were missing critical client deadlines weekly, and burnout was so severe we were hemorrhaging senior staff.
Boom. Right there. We have our character and our conflict, and it is visceral.
It's highly evocative, right? Underwater, hemorrhaging staff, burnout.
You are painting a vivid picture of a high-stress environment. The interviewer can instantly visualize the tension in that room.
You've manufactured an immediate sense of stakes.
Yes.
Then we moved to the journey. I didn't want to just patch the problem, so I spent my first 2 weeks doing one-on-ones with the team to identify the exact bottlenecks.
Nice.
Based on that, I evaluated 3 automation platforms, built a business case for the most robust option, pitched it to the executive board, and personally ran the integration workshops.
Now, this is where you demonstrate your methodology.
Because you aren't just taking credit for a software implementation anymore.
No, you are showing a multi-tiered approach to leadership. You demonstrated empathy by conducting the one-on-ones.
Analytical rigor by evaluating the platforms.
Strategic influence by pitching the board. and operational follow-through by actually running the workshops.
You are detailing the exact mechanic of your competence.
Which brings us to the resolution.
Within a quarter, we didn't just hit that 10% reduction in processing time. We entirely eliminated weekend overflow work, staff retention stabilized, and the team actually had the bandwidth to start taking on proactive strategy rather than just reacting to crises.
The contrast between those two answers is just staggering.
It really is. The first candidate implemented a piece of software. The second candidate rescued an entire department from total collapse.
And fundamentally upgraded their operational capacity. The data point, the 10% time reduction is present in both answers.
But the second candidate anchored it to human outcomes. They
Yeah.
solved a human problem.
Exactly.
But wait, let me push back on the core premise of this strategy for a second.
Sure, push back.
If I am the candidate, my overriding goal is to present myself as a hyper-competent, low-risk asset, right?
Yes, ideally.
By leaning so heavily into Pillar 2, by vividly describing the dysfunction, the missed deadlines, the fact that my team was an absolute disaster, aren't I risking guilt by association?
That is a very common fear.
Because aren't I planting the idea in the interviewer's mind that I just operate in chaotic, failing environments? It feels incredibly counterintuitive to highlight the depth of the failure when you are trying to prove your excellence.
That hesitation is incredibly common, but it represents a fundamental misunderstanding of how narrative contrast actually drives perception.
Okay, how so?
In cognitive psychology, there is a concept regarding contrast effects. The perceived magnitude of an achievement is directly proportional to the severity of the initial deficit.
So if you start your narrative on a plateau just saying the department was fine and I made it slightly better, the trajectory of your impact is practically flat.
Exactly. There is no delta.
And the delta is what they're buying.
Yes. The delta is your value proposition. By establishing a deep valley of dysfunction at the start, you are artificially steepening the angle of your ascent.
You are not the cause of the chaos. You are the highly specialized intervention that cured it.
Exactly. If you diminish the severity of the dragon, you inherently diminish the glory of the knight who slayed it.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Vividly illustrating the operational failure doesn't make you look incompetent at all. It provides the necessary contrast to make your eventual success look truly transformative.
You are setting the stage so your strategic execution actually carries weight.
You're guiding them through a case study of your own impact.
But the rules of the game change entirely when you step out of the interview chair, don't they?
Oh, completely, 180 degrees.
Because when you are the candidate, you have to be the protagonist. But when you're sitting across the table trying to sell a product, secure funding, or influence a stakeholder, you have to completely invert the architecture.
This is the pivot that breaks most professionals. We spend our entire careers being trained to advocate for our own competence,
Right, to make ourselves the center of the narrative.
But the moment you transition into a pitch environment, continuing to center yourselves is a fatal strategic error. The customer or the stakeholder you are trying to influence, they must be the protagonist.
You must vacate the hero role entirely.
You got to step aside.
It's the classic Gandalf or Yoda dynamic from the source material.
Yes, the Yoda principle.
I mean, the audience already understands the pop culture shorthand here, but the psychological application in B2B sales or internal pitching is actually really profound.
Because you are not the hero wielding the sword. You are the wise guide providing the tools.
Right. Your product is not the protagonist. It is just the magic item that enables the actual protagonist to overcome their conflict.
And yet, look at almost any enterprise software pitch deck today.
Oh, it's arable.
Or any internal proposal for a new initiative. 90% of them open with what we can call the ego pitch.
The ego pitch. What does that sound like?
We are the industry leaders. Our technology is disruptive. Look at our award-winning architecture. We are going to come in and optimize your broken workflow.
Ugh, that just triggers immediate defensive posturing.
It absolutely does, because it strips the stakeholder of their agency.
Right. By positioning yourself as the savior swooping in to fix their mess, you are implicitly casting them in the role of the helpless victim.
Or worse, you're casting them as the incompetent manager who allowed the mess to happen in the first place.
And no executive wants to buy a product that makes them feel secondary in their own operational narrative.
Psychologically, human beings fiercely guard their protagonist status. When you threaten it, they will find logical reasons to reject your data simply to protect their ego.
So we have to completely rewrite the pitch using the stakeholder as the character.
Exactly. Let's map out a complex enterprise integration pitch.
Okay, so instead of talking about our API capabilities right out of the gate, we start with their conflict.
Start with the pain.
Right. Your organization is scaling faster than your infrastructure can support. Your regional teams are operating in data silos, leading to duplicated efforts and massive latency in your supply chain.
See, you are immediately validating their specific friction. You are demonstrating that you understand the nuance of their struggle better than they might even understand it themselves.
Which builds immense credibility before you even mention your own solution.
Then we introduce the journey, which is where the magic sword comes in.
Our integration architecture doesn't just sync your databases, it acts as a centralized nervous system that empowers your regional directors to access real-time inventory, eliminating the latency without requiring them to abandon their legacy systems.
Notice the phrasing there. It empowers your regional directors. The tool isn't doing the work in a vacuum.
The tool is enabling the stakeholders' team to achieve mastery over their environment.
Yes. The focus remains relentlessly on their agency.
And the resolution cements it, so that you can aggressively expand into the European market next quarter without the operational risk of your supply chain fracturing.
You are selling them their own idealized future. The resolution isn't you successfully deploy our software.
The resolution is you conquer the European market.
Exactly. When you adopt this guide persona, you fundamentally alter the interpersonal dynamic. The ego pitch is confrontational. It's me across the table from you, trying to extract budget.
But the guide pitch is collaborative. We are sitting on the same side of the table, looking at your problem, and I am simply handing you the lantern to illuminate the path forward. But operating as the guide requires an incredible suppression of ego.
It really does.
We are so conditioned to want the credit. We want to be the ones recognized for saving the quarter, to deliberately step back and play the facilitator, to let the client or the cross-functional partner take the hero's mantle.
It requires a level of professional maturity that, frankly, a lot of highly competitive people really struggle with.
Because it is an exercise in delayed gratification. You are trading immediate ego validation for long-term influence and trust.
And to truly inhabit that guide role, or even to be a credible protagonist in your own operational stories, you have to master the final and arguably most dangerous element of narrative strategy.
The intentional application of friction. You're talking about the strategic power of vulnerability. The idea from the text that a story functioning perfectly is actually a liability.
It is a massive liability. Let's examine the psychology of perfection in a corporate setting for a minute.
Okay.
If you present a case study or an update where everything went exactly according to plan, you foresaw every variable, the execution was flawless, the ROI was immediate, and there was zero pushback, what is the immediate reaction of a sophisticated audience?
They don't believe a word of it.
Right.
They immediately start looking for the hidden variables or assuming you are manipulating the data to look good.
Exactly, because experiential reality is inherently messy. Progress is almost never linear. So when you present a frictionless narrative, you trigger the audience's innate skepticism.
It sounds like sanitized corporate propaganda.
It lacks the texture of reality. But when you deliberately inject a moment of failure, a miscalculation, or a period of intense doubt into your narrative, you completely disarm that skepticism.
Let's bring this back to the job interview scenario, because I think that is where the fear of looking vulnerable is highest.
Oh, absolutely.
We had the candidate who saved the department from drowning in admin work. How did they inject friction into that story without ruining their credibility?
By showing that the journey wasn't a straight line, during the journey phase, you just add a simple pivot point.
Like what?
You say, I built the initial business case for the automation software and presented it to the VP, and she completely rejected it. She pointed out that I hadn't properly accounted for the training downtime.
See, that feels terrifying to say in an interview. You are literally admitting you failed an executive presentation.
It feels risky, yes. But look at the sequence that must immediately follow it.
Okay, what comes next?
She rejected it because I missed the training downtime. So I went back, completely overhauled the implementation timeline, secured buy-in from the shift managers to cover the training gaps, and repitched it successfully 2 weeks later.
Okay, so you aren't calibrating vulnerability for the sake of sympathy. You are using the failure as a setup to demonstrate your recovery mechanics.
Precisely. You are demonstrating a lack of fragility. Nassim Taleb talks about the concept of anti-fragility, right? Things that actually gain strength from disorder.
A leader who presents a flawless facade is incredibly fragile. The moment a variable changes or they make a public error, their entire projected identity shatters.
But a leader who openly narrates their missteps, processes the feedback without ego defense, and adapts their strategy. They prove they are robust.
You aren't showing weakness at all. You are providing empirical evidence of your resilience.
It's the difference between saying, I am perfect, and saying, I am capable of handling imperfection.
And in a rapidly shifting business environment, the latter is vastly more valuable. The ability to navigate the friction is the core competency.
So the dosage is key. It's not a random confession of incompetence. It is a highly structured sequence. Action, resistance or failure, synthesis of feedback, adaptation, and ultimate success.
It builds an unbreakable layer of trust. When you are willing to admit where your model failed or where your initial hypothesis was wrong, the audience is infinitely more likely to believe you when you present the data showing your ultimate success.
Because you have proven that you are an objective observer of your own reality, not just a marketer of your own ego.
Which brings us full circle. Storytelling, when executed with this level of strategic rigor, is not just a mechanism for making presentations slightly more palatable.
No, it is the currency of influence. It is how you align complex organizations, how you secure resources, and how you manage up effectively.
We started by establishing the biological imperative that the brain requires chronological narrative to synthesize oxytocin, lower cortisol defenses, and internalize data.
We then mapped the engineering. The 4 pillars of character, conflict, journey, and resolution. We learned that without conflict, there's literally no attention, and without resolution, there is no strategic takeaway.
Then we explored the fluid dynamics of those pillars. How to be the empathetic protagonist in an interview by embracing the contrast of the deep valley and the high peak. And how to completely invert that structure in a pitch, utilizing the guide principle to empower the stakeholder, making them the hero of their own scaling journey while your product acts as the enabler.
And finally, we established the absolute necessity of strategic vulnerability. Proving your anti-fragility by openly navigating friction and adaptation, thereby destroying skepticism and building authentic trust.
It really is a fundamental paradigm shift in how you operate professionally.
And to solidify this, we want to leave you with an immediate practical application. Sometime today, just look at your calendar.
Pick one recent event. It could be a successful sprint, a frustrating misalignment with a partner team, or a logistical bottleneck you finally cleared.
Take 5 minutes and map it onto the 4 pillars. Define the character, articulate the conflict, trace the friction of the journey, and land on the strategic resolution. The simple act of structuring the raw data of your week into this narrative vehicle will completely change how you perceive your own work. You will begin to see opportunities for influence that you were previously blind to.
And as you start deploying these narrative architectures, moving away from just dumping shipping containers of unanchored data, consider this final thought.
What is it?
We know that narrative lowers defense mechanisms. We know that casting someone as the protagonist makes them fiercely protective of the collaboration. So think about the single most obstinate, difficult stakeholder you have to deal with right now.
Oh, everyone has one.
The executive who always kills your budgets.
Yeah.
The cross-functional lead who refuses to align with your timeline. Have you been trying to bludgeon them into submission with raw data?
Have you been engaged in a purely confrontational ego pitch?
Exactly. It is highly likely your approach has inadvertently triggered their defensive posturing. So what if you stop pushing the spreadsheet?
What if you architected a highly calibrated narrative where they are the protagonist facing a systemic conflict, and you simply offer a tool to help them navigate the journey?
You might be exactly one well-crafted story away from completely changing the trajectory of that relationship.
Because the data is just the raw material.
It's time to start building the architecture. Thanks for exploring the depths with us. We will catch you next time.